Okay, everyone, we've heard from several dynamic speakers so far, and we still have 3 to go, and our next dynamic speaker is John Wentworth. John has been an integral part of the planning and implementation of the Mammoth Lakes Trail Network. I know there are a bunch of folks in this room who know the Mammoth Lakes Trails Network. He's actively involved in increasing the public access, the trail development planning, the funding, and cross-jurisdictional coordination for that program, and continues to be active in the funding programs for that as well, as I understand. John has served as CEO since 2007 of the Mammoth Lakes Trail and Public Access Incorporation, or MLTPA. Prior to his trail and transit focus, John worked in the motion picture industry. You can tell he's a movie star, where his credits include being the co-producer of Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, and Mulholland Drive. He is a Mammoth Lakes resident, an active trails and transit enthusiast, and a very, very strong advocate for access for all to active transit. John Wentworth.
Thank you all very much. Can you hear me okay? There's one very important piece to my CV. Well, there's a couple of pieces. I'll talk about them in a second, but one of them is that I'm a true acolyte of Mia Burke. We've never met before. We just met today, but the reason, one of the many reasons I'm here is because of a connection that the community of Mammoth Lakes and I have personally to Alta Planning and Design, and I'll talk about that in a second. I know how they work. I'm not sure if they're hustling work here, if they've actually got a contract and a deal, but if you work with these guys, you're in the best hands you could be in. So I would, and I no compensation for making that endorsement, but I'd throw that out there. So I wanted to try to tell you a story, but you know, all good stories have beginnings, middles, and ends, and we're not even close. I don't even know if we're in the middle of this thing yet. It's been going on for several years. How much time do we have? This story, I think, if you just take a sampling of Mia's experiences, these stories, and as you guys know, they unfold, they unfold, they unfold, and they unfold. They do not stop. And I want to thank Fora for inviting me to be here. I need to thank Vimeo because about a year or two ago, I posted a PowerPoint presentation on Vimeo just out into the universe. And I think about 12 people looked at it. One of them was Josh Metz, who I've never met before. As I was driving over the Sierra at 3 o'clock in the morning last night, trying to figure out where am I going and why am I going and who's Josh. And I had realized I had to thank Vimeo, because if Vimeo wasn't there, Josh never would have found me. I wouldn't be here. So it's a great pleasure to be here. So I'm just going to go into this, and I'm kind of swimming in deja vu because a lot of the work we did with Alta is informed all this work. And so we are a community that engaged a professional, high-level, world-class set of planners to do the work that we've done. And it's a very interesting coincidence that these things are kind of lined up this way. So this hat I have on, which has it's not exactly the Klondike polar bear, it's kind of like that, but it says the Mammoth Lakes Trail System underneath it. And I've been the CEO for this foundation for the last, since 2007. Last year, in the spring of last year, I made a decision that I'm still not quite sure how and why that happened, but to run for the town council. So I'm now also on the town council of Mammoth Lakes. So I'm not only a trails advocate, I'm also an elected official of the town of community of Mammoth Lakes. And these things actually work very well together. We'll see how this experiment works out. But I'm going to take this hat off just for a second and keep it here so you can admire the polar bear. A lot of people wonder what that's all about. So all of these things come together. And I think the perspective I hope I can share with you guys today, it's very different from the urban perspective. And I remember at the beginning of this process, we had a reason to call upon Alta, and we went through the introduction of the ideas, many of the ideas that Mia talked about, but we have to talk about this in a rural context. How many people have here skied in Mammoth Lakes? Not enough. How many people have been there in the summertime? Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. I moved there, as was mentioned, I've got a background in the motion picture business. I was an art student. I really have no business being here at all. I don't really know why I'm here, but I hope I can share some interesting stories. I moved to Mammoth in the real estate boom, remodeled a house, sold it, made a fat bunch of money. And the summer times captured me. And I said, well, the winters are nice, but the summers up here are unbelievable. And I ended up kind of hanging around. Mammoth Lakes is a small community of about 8,000 people on the eastern side of the Sierra. I think that's that way. Other side of the state. And we look east. I mean, there's a big, beautiful mountain range. We're part of the Basin and Range. Salt Lake City is over on the western side, on the eastern side of us. We're informed by cities in Colorado like Durango or Moab or places like that. We're kind of that kind of a town. And recreation and skiing, downhill skiing, has been the reason to exist for Mammoth Lakes and many of the communities in the Eastern Sierra. It's been that way for a long time. And Mammoth Lakes is a globally recognized recreation amenity. It was sold at the very height of the real estate boom back in 2005 for $365 million. A guy named Barry Sternlicht bought it. That was the same year that I sold my house for a really nice profit. And Mr. Sternlicht now has a very interesting piece of property. And the annual revenue is about $100 million. It's sort of known as kind of a cash cow among the ski area folks. It was founded in 1953, so without going to all the sort of the difficulties of skiing these days, it's a mature asset. It's a mature thing. It's founded on expectations of snowfall. It's founded on expectations of what a skiing population is like. And it's a relatively mature thing as recreation amenities go. There had always been talk in Mammoth Lakes, well, maybe we should be diversifying our portfolio. Maybe we should be doing something other than just downhill skiing. There's other things we can get into. This is a beautiful image of mountain bikers taking over the world, and we all know the kind of the egotistic aspirations of mountain bikers, but a global domination theme seems appropriate. There was some economic studies coming out of UC Santa Barbara. They wrote an economic study for the town. This is back 2005, 2006. Well, why don't you guys consider becoming the mountain biking capital of California? Oh, sounds like a great idea. Why don't we think about doing something like that? Well, we got skiing. Everything's fine. It's always going to snow. Let's just keep sticking with what we're going. We'll do what we can, but everything's working here, and we're just going to keep kind of moving forward. We had a trails plan. It's a very good plan. It was locally produced. Had some interesting graphics on the cover, but it was a good trails plan. And everything seemed like things were going along just fine. Mia's stories about Portland and 12 federal agencies and 9 counties, and it reminds me why I did in fact move to the middle of nowhere. I'm kind of happy being there. But we have our own jurisdictional challenges, and we also assume we live up in the beautiful Eastern Sierra. There's I think 30,000 people between 2 counties. There's nobody up there. We don't have these kinds of urban complexities that you have in cities and that kind of stuff. And as you can see, the town of Mammoth Lakes is completely surrounded by the Inyo National Forest. And in a lot of research I've done, this includes about 80% of the incorporated boundary of the town is United States Forest Service land. Is anybody here from the Forest Service? Just checking. BLM? Where's BLM? Hi guys. How you doing? So, the Forest Service can't really believe it that they've got a town of 10,000 people within their forest, and the community can't really believe it either. That how does this all work? The town was incorporated in 1983, 1984. I grew up in Washington, D.C., in the East Coast. I had long-distance relatives in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and we had a small house up there, and there was a pathway that went from the town down to the beach with a public access easement that was about, 150, 200 years old. And so having these kinds of public access easements made a lot of sense to me, but in a town that's only 30 years old, maybe they hadn't stumbled upon these kinds of things yet. And if you kind of dig below the jurisdictional map, it starts to look like this. You've got 2 national forests. You've got, I think, 3 different wilderness areas. In California, every incorporated town has to have a sphere of influence, a planning area. So you have an urban growth boundary. I don't know if you guys can see this. If I wiggle this around right there, that's the urban growth boundary for the town. This is the incorporated municipal boundary, which includes all that Forest Service land. And this orange area is the planning area of the community of Mammoth Lakes, which extends out over, again, a couple forest wilderness areas and all kinds of stuff. So this is the stage as was set in 2006. And as is not an unfamiliar story in small western towns, at some point somebody decides it's going to be a good idea to put up a gate over a road to restrict public access to public lands. It just happens, and it happens, and it happens. In this case, it was a subdivision on the outside of town. You can see the mountains in the background. At one point, these were going to be built as a second ski area called the Sherwins. It's a backcountry skiing mecca. It's within the incorporated boundary of the town, and there was a parking problem. And some folks decided, well, we've got to put up this gate across this road to keep the riffraff from going back and forth to public lands. And I happened to be one of those very enthusiastic backcountry skiers, and I thought this was insane. And I got some folks together. I just sold my house. I had some money in my pocket. I was feeling a little brash. And we said, well, look, we can work this out. Let's get an easement around this gate so the public can go back and forth, and you can have your gate. We'll deal with the parking problem. The representation was made that, well, we'll file the easement when the county, as soon as the town vacates the public right-of-way. We will file this public access easement with the county. And I mentioned my little story about Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the access to the beach and all that. So the town council took its action. About a week later, we called the county. Hey, what about that public access easement? Did they file it? It's all good to go? And the response was, what public access easement? What easement are you talking about? No easement had been filed. So this led to a kind of dramatic public disturbance. And the issue was, as you can see here, where the gate is, this is literally the boundary between the urban landscape and public lands. And this is a boundary that people are not aware of. You don't think about this when you're walking around, but it exists. And this is very problematic in a community like ours that's completely surrounded by these unbelievable public lands, experiences, and opportunities. And it really matters because if you start looking at the existing infrastructure, the existing front country trails, what's called the coincident trails. These are trails like the PCT and the JMT and all these kinds of things that are just integrated into the community and the culture of the place where we live. And you add it with the road, the Forest Service's road system, motorized activity, and that kind of stuff. You have on paper 322 miles of trails. That's a great foundation for a Mammoth Lakes trail system. Now, why don't we just kind of bring all this stuff together, call it what it is, and get on with our lives and do good things with this trail system. This trail system would have connections to the Pacific Crest Trail, John Muir Trail, 4 different wilderness areas, Yosemite National Park, a national monument. What an opportunity. But again, it's all in the different jurisdictions, and no one's ever bothered to think about this. Okay, so let's have a meeting. Let's get everybody together, a crowd a little bit bigger than this. Let's get the community together, and let's have a discussion about this and see if we think this is a good idea. This is MLTPA before it was incorporated. As you know, you citizen activists out there, you know how this works. You come up with an idea, then you print a business card, and you're in business. This is at the stage that this thing was at. A couple of business cards. We had some graphics. I actually drew this up in a restaurant in Sun Valley one day. Let's do what we're supposed to do, get the community together and talk about this. And so we brought folks together. And Mia, can you tell me who this guy is right here with the yellow glasses? Does that look like Jeff Olson? Yeah. Hi, Jeff. So as part of having this public meeting, there's a community of 7,000 people. We about 350 people showed up, which we didn't really expect, but this seemed to be resonating with the community. And in this photograph, this is Jeff Olson, a guy from Alta Planning, who I had called because Jackson Hole had just finished a very ambitious trails plan. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the guy that we got to get. And again, with my graphic and my business card, where's Jeff Olson? Here's his phone number. Call him up, get his ass out here. It's that simple. It's just, we need this guy. You need to come out here. We'll get a couple dollars together to cover your travel to make this happen. It gives credibility to your effort, what you're trying to do. Jeff, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, Forest Service, town officials, county officials, and everybody agreed that this is probably a good idea to coordinate and represent these multiple jurisdictions and partners as a single coherent trail system. So you've got buy-in. This is a good idea to do this. Let's move forward with this thing. And this is one of the key things that Jeff, one of many great things that Jeff did to help us out with this process, was this triangle of understanding how this is going to work. The public agencies, the nonprofit NGOs, and the private sector. And how this triangle, it's like 3 legs of a stool. You're going to lose one leg. You're going to lose 2 legs. But then those two legs might come back. It gives you a foundation to work to move forward to get things done. And okay, this is going to be no problem. We're going to get started. So Alta Planning and Design eventually was hired to produce the Mammoth Lakes, an update to the town of Mammoth Lake system, trail system master plan. It took about 3 years to do it. A lot of cooperation with the Forest Service, a lot of cooperation for the town, a lot of public meetings, a lot of public engagement, a really good, fully vetted, very beautiful plan. It's finally adopted in 2011. We did a couple other things. Small rural community, we don't have a lot of money. How are we going to fund and pay for this stuff? Well, let's go to the voters with a couple ideas for some revenue. So in 2008, we put together something called Measure R. Measure R is for the specific investment of recreation trails and parks. It's about a 0.5% sales tax increase. And it was a pretty interesting thing because the political leadership was saying, well, yeah, I think we can do something like this, but you're going to have to go out there and figure out, what the folks want and how they're going to be willing to do something like this. And I went out to people and said, okay, we're going to do this thing. Are you guys going to support it? And the question was, well, is this money going to go into the town's general fund? I said, well, yeah, I guess so. Well, if you're going to do that, I'm not going to vote for it. I'm going to do everything I can do to kill it. I said, okay, you've got a problem with the government? Yeah, no general fund. Okay, well, what if it's a special tax, which is going to require a 2/3 plus 1 but supermajority to pass it? That's 66 plus 1% to pass this thing. What would that, oh yeah, we'll go for that. As long as we know it's not going in the general fund, we'll vote for it and we'll support it. Okay. Get a consultant, get some campaign people together, run a good, effective campaign, connect with your community. 72% voted to approve this thing. So this is it's a sales tax of about $1 million a year, $900,000 a year. No sunset for the specific use of recreation trails and parks. Funding source A. 2 years later, there's a utility user tax that's expiring. Let's go back out to the voters again. We know that if we can tell the voters it's for a specific set of things, in this case it was mobility, recreation, and arts and culture, same drill. 2/3 plus 1 vote, not going in the general fund, can only be used for these specific projects. 67%. Wasn't in the 70s like we liked, but it passed. So now the community has $1.6 million annually, no sunset, to invest in these things. Okay, good. We're off to the races. This is good. And I'll tell you why it's extra good in a second. So the Trail System Master Plan is the document that guides and implements the Mammoth Lakes Trail System. And I can't emphasize how important it is to have a planning document that makes sense, that you've really beat up with a public process, so it's the things about it that are implementable are doable, because the things you run into politically, socially, economically are going to throw you curveballs every day. And you have to make sure you can go back to a document that you know is reliable, and you know that the public investment in it is reliable so that it'll see you through the storms. Sure enough, the U.S. economy collapsed, which is, it does that from time to time. But out of this collapse, there's always an opportunity. I'm sure you could speak to how opportunities come out of dark times. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So using funds from ARA and a plan that's vetted and is in place and tells what to do if you get a bunch of money, a whole bunch of very interesting and very important projects get done in a very short period of time. One of them was a website that we built that's cutting edge technology piece. It's responsively designed. It brings all the trail system into one single coherent place. Most of you know what this is. This is what Google Analytics looks like. We're approaching 400,000 page views. This is the same way that Josh Metz found me. This is how the world finds your recreation opportunities that you build. You have to be incorporating and building technology into this. Who knows what inbound marketing is? Good for you. You'll get something. When you get a second, Google it, look into it. Inbound marketing is critical. It's a whole topic unto itself. So in this short period, $19 million gets invested in infrastructure in the Mammoth Lakes Trail System. This is because this is this nice marriage of hustle, opportunistic work, having a good plan in place, and something happening somewhere else that all of a sudden there's money, and you got your plan, and here's the money, and you marry it. You've got forward-looking, excellent folks working in the federal agencies who have access to these dollars. You marry these things up, and you're done, and you get things done. The total amount of investment over this period was about $20 million. And for a small town of 8,000 people to invest that kind of money in this short a period of time is pretty remarkable. I still don't know how it happened, but it happened, and we're all very proud of it. I hope that you guys find yourselves in those same kinds of situations. It's the way things should work. And in this period, we had this $20 million investment, a new trail system master plan, new funding sources without sunset that produced about $1.6 million a year. We did about 71 different identified partnered efforts. Back to that triangle again. The public, the town, the federal agencies, the private sector. 71 different identified projects where you have all these three legs of the stool working on these things. And a very exciting time. So when you do all this kind of stuff, you have to have a ribbon cutting. There's our forest supervisor. That's the then mayor of the town. Girl Scouts, of course. And you can see an example of the beautiful trail signage behind some folks in the background. And it really comes back to the power of this triangle to make these things happen. And what happens next is how this triangle gets tested. Because, as I mentioned, there was the Great Recession of 2007, all the ancillary effects. The state of California went through a financial crisis during this time. We had a grant from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy for about $120,000. The day before Christmas, on like December 23rd, we get a call saying, "Hi, we're not paying any more money. Tell all your staff, sorry, there's no checks coming. No one's going to get paid." You know, that kind of thing happens. The town of Mammoth Lakes was faced with the threat of municipal bankruptcy. This had to do with some litigation with a real estate developer. We were actually in federal bankruptcy court, and the settlement was reached. But this was, you can imagine the effect of something like that has on a small community. It was very disruptive, and not in the nice way people like to use that term these days. The other thing we're wrestling out with is 4 years of historic drought. And I'll talk about that in a second. And climate change, drought, as these things are related, this is the kind of thing where you go back to that partnership model. These are the kind of challenges that you have to be able to weather, and you have to be able to have the capacity to get through these kinds of things. So here we are. We're 2015. Let's go up high. Let's take the high view. And what better thing to do than have a look at the weather for the long term? Weather. Everybody loves the weather. Well, the U.S. winter outlook over California says warmer by 50%. Let's take a look at what some of the climate folks are. Oh, we're right here. We are in extraordinary drought. Does anybody know what extraordinary drought is? It's that color red, you know, when you've cut yourself and the blood's dried there for a couple days. So California starts to look a little bit like this. That's not so pretty. And this drought has been building. It's been going on. We're now in the 4th year of this thing. Is it a 200-year drought? Is it a medieval mega drought? These are the things that folks in our community are starting to think. And we're in the ski business. We're in the snow business. How are we gonna adapt? How are we gonna change? The temperature's going up. And this is, you know, towns like in Florida, folks, where sea levels are rising, that's one tip of the spear. But these mountain communities, these snow-based communities, that's the other end of the spear. And at this point, this is starting to become real to folks in our communities now. This is not something that we're just going, it's the 2nd year with no snow. It's the 3rd year. This is now the 4th year. And ski areas start to look like this. It's kind of tough. And the visitation, we're a tourism-based recreation economy, the visitation starts to reflect this. The data starts to reflect what people start to do. This is a species starting to adapt to new realities. And the income for the town comes through transient occupancy taxes. It's a tourism tax. That's how we measure the economic activity and what people are doing. Our summer TOT is setting new records year over year. The bar graph on the far left is kind of sequentially out of order, but it's way up. Summer in Mammoth Lakes. And here's the 5-year average down here. And at the same time, the winter visitation is declining. It's going down. And we see this on the website. We can track the same levels of activity. The winter months are, I think, in here, and you can see the spike in the summertime when folks are coming up to do summer activities. We'll talk about, there's a lot to say about technology, but the ability to track data and visitation through contemporary technology is a key piece of a lot of puzzles, because you're not guessing anymore. If you drive your visitor portals through technology-based systems like this, you can measure what people are doing. It's not, well, I think it's going to do this, or maybe someone's going to show up. You can actually start charting this stuff out. It's an interesting irony that these things come together. So we're going to have to adapt, and the trail system is going to be a big part of how we adapt our recreation economy to address the needs of users coming up to visit us. Another thing that's happened is something called Digital 395. Has anybody heard of this? One person. Good. Digital 395 is broadband capacity that's now in the Eastern Sierra. And the network is 432 strands of multi-mode fiber, each of which is capable of transmitting 200 terabytes of data with a theoretical total of 840 petabytes across the entire network. Now, who knows what that means? No one's got a clue. Okay, well, we'll get that in a second. Yeah, we're the professors. Yeah. This is another ARA project. This was funded through the ARA process. It goes from Reno, basically all the way down towards Bakersfield. It ties into the national broadband networks of the fullest, deepest amount of broadband capacity. And for some reason, someone thought it would be a good idea to do all this so that this is the housing that we live in, we could connect our little shacks to this. Well, that's kind of interesting. Let's go back to the water analogy. If this was our broadband before Digital 395, this is a leaky hose fitting. This is the kind of capacity we have now. We've gone from the RIP hose in the backyard to torrents and torrents of broadband data. One of these optical fibers delivers 200 terabytes of data. 200 terabytes equals 200,000 gigabits. There are 30,000 residents in the Eastern Sierra. Therefore, 30,000 residents could be served with dedicated gigabit internet service from a single optical fiber with enough data left over to serve 170,000 additional residents. That's from one strand. Digital 395 has 432 of these strands. This is an enormous amount of capacity. If you guys ever look at this for your speed tests, it delivers you 1,000. You're used to looking at 10 or 20 or 30 up and down. This is thousands. That's a lot of water. So if we don't have water coming out of the sky, can we take our recreation amenities and facilities and start integrating them in with this huge technology opportunity? And these are the kinds of things I know that folks in this business look at these opportunities, you figure out, okay, we got that, the snow's melting, we've got this great trail system, how do we start thinking about tying these things together? How are we gonna do all this? Because now the Eastern Sierra has as much broadband capacity as anywhere in the country. We've got more broadband capacity than Los Angeles or San Francisco, I think, if you interpret these numbers right. And this, I won't speculate as to how this happened. No one did a needs analysis, I'll tell you that much. No one said there's 30,000 people out there, therefore we need 8 trillion petabytes of data. I don't really know how this happened, but it's here. You remember the films with the big whale that washes up on the beach? And the indigenous folks see this thing and they go, oh my God, that's the biggest whale we've ever seen. Go get the scalpels. We got blubber to harvest. It's that kind of a situation. How are we going to leverage this thing? That's the question. How are we going to tie this into our recreation economy? How are we going to use the kinds of web tools that we've already developed for the Mammoth Lakes Trail System that is attracting up to 400,000 page views at this point to enhance our recreation economy? Because in the Eastern Sierra, it looks like this. That's why we live there. We live in a beautiful place. How are we going to leverage that to make all this stuff work? And there's another third and critical opportunity that's happening. And again, I turn to my colleagues in the federal agencies. The Inyo National Forest, where the town of Mammoth Lakes is situated, is going through a management plan revision. And this is a picture of the cover of the management plan. It's from 1988. When I go to our local radio station for the talk-in shows, and The plan is older than the DJ. I know it's probably time for an update. And this is being done under something called the 2012 Planning Rule for Land Management for the National Forest System. And this is, any of you folks who have been involved in Forest Service issues, you know that these rules that define how things work can get very contentious and very difficult. Finally, in 2012, Congress said, these are the rules. This is how we're going to do this. And the emphasis in the rule itself is on collaboration. Increased collaboration provides benefits to the planning process well into implementation. Analysis time may be shortened, administrative objections and the time needed to resolve them may be reduced, and projects developed under the resulting plans may be better understood and supported. It makes a lot of sense. Anybody does any kind of planning or does environmental work, you know if you front load it with consensus at the beginning, you get buy-in to something you're doing at the beginning, you're going to get through your NEPAs and get through your CEQAs without people going crazy halfway through those environmental processes. It's something that you want to do. And the Forest Service has enormous challenges with litigation. In addition to this is that when they set up the 2012 planning rule, the folks in Washington said, well, we're going to designate 8 forests to be the early adopters, to be the canaries, the little birds that go into the coal mine with this new rule, and we're going to see how this works. And naturally, the Inyo National Forest is one of these 8 early adopters. Okay. Fortunately, we can do something with this because we've done in Mammoth Lakes 2 community-based collaborative efforts. One was for this area called the Sherwins, where that gate was. With input from the Forest Service, we set up a truly collaborative process that had a lot of very contentious, difficult issues, but a community-based, publicly based consensus for about 30 different trails in that area was developed, signed off on, lots of nice pictures. It was done. We also did it in something called the Lakes Basin. And I didn't get out of the town council meeting last night until about 10:30 because we spent about an hour and a half having a very interesting, difficult debate about issues having to do with this. I mean, these recreation issues are embedded and woven right into our community. So we know how to do collaborative efforts. It's not easy. It takes time and resources. We know how to do it. There's also a document from the Forest Service called the Framework for Sustainable Recreation. This is a Forest Service document that emphasizes a diverse range of quality natural and cultural resource-based recreation opportunities in partnership with people and communities. To protect, partner, perform, and to plan by implementing systems and processes to ensure effective decisions, sound investments, and accountability. Collaborative approaches to the integrated solutions across the landscape and enhance professionalism of our workforce. This was authored, I don't know exactly, but it's rumored to have been authored by a guy named Joe Mead. I was back in the holidays over Thanksgiving in D.C., and I set up a meeting with Mr. Mead. Mr. Mead is blind. Mr. Mead was the forest supervisor of the Chugach National Forest. And I think if you can sort of picture your public processes and the kind of folks that show up at your public meetings, just imagine what a blind forest supervisor is dealing with up in the Chugach up in Alaska. It's probably a pretty interesting crew. Out of those experiences, this document was produced. This is the recognition from the Forest Service that public agencies do not have the money and the resources and the capacity they need to fulfill their missions. Congress is not appropriating the money. They don't have the capacity to do it. They've got to reach out to other folks to help them do it. So it's a huge opportunity. And this framework has been institutionalized in Region 3, which is about 11 forests in the Southwest. It's implemented into the management program of the entire region. Forests like the Deschutes up in Oregon are taking the same document and integrating it in. And this management, it sets up the opportunity for communities and stakeholders to work as true, effective working partners with federal agencies. It's a very difficult thing to do. If you're someone who works BLM or Forest Service and you want to have the capacity and the tools that you need to get your jobs done, and you don't have those tools, you don't have that money, well, let's find a way to change that culture so you can be responsible for your legal and fiduciary responsibilities, the things you've got to do by law, but you can effectively leverage capacities outside of your agencies to get things done. This is a sea change in how public lands will be managed, and it is the future because there just is not the resources or the dollars or the capacity to get the things that they need to get done. And this is just an example of what it is when the Southwestern folks turn this into reality and what it means on the ground. Effective partnerships, accountability to partners, succinct, focused, effective ways to implement and get things done to enhance public lands experiences. If you're in the community of Mammoth Lakes, completely surrounded by national forests and some of the most beautiful landscapes in the country, you want to work effectively with your public lands partners. But getting the stuff integrated into these management plans is what the opportunity, this new planning rule is, and the new opportunities that's coming out of our forest plan revision. So we set up the Eastern Sierra Recreation Collaborative. And we've had 5 meetings, Bishop, Lone Pine, Independence, June Lake, and we're attracting people from all over the country to this because they know as early adopter forests, what comes out of this forest plan revision is going to be meaningful to their landscapes and their communities all across the country. A woman from IMBA, who's now the Northern California director for IMBA, lives in Shasta. She's got 2 kids. She drives 8 hours to these meetings, to come down to go to these meetings. Folks back in D.C. are looking at, there's a grassroots effort out on the ground that's taking us seriously with this planning room collaboration. You're setting something up and you're working with the staffs. We need to see how this thing's all going to work. The collaborative established principles and guidelines for how to engage with the process. They've written all these desired conditions and the things that they aspire to in the planning speak of the Forest Service planners, so it's useful for them so they can do something with it. And this is back in November, and the collaborative completed the drafting of a recreation strategy. It's about a 16-page document that's being integrated again with how the forest planning process works. And then just last week, there was a final meeting where the final draft was put together. And the leadership team is now working now and over this weekend, so by Monday morning, we'll have a document and a letter to go to Randy Moore, who's the regional forester for Region 5, who will go to our Indian National Forest. And it's also going to town of Mammoth Lakes and Monterey County for letters of support from the neighboring agencies. We'll see where this goes. But this is all in this theme of adaptation. What is that? What word is that? Adaptation. Technology and enhanced partnerships. So from the world of no urban infrastructure and these kinds of things, from the rural world, this is what we're dealing with. These are the opportunities, the way forward that I think for rural communities across the country, dealing with trails, dealing with recreation assets that are integral to our economies. These are the kinds of ways forward. And one of the deja vu moments I was having is when Jeff Olson came out to Mammoth for that public meeting where about many hundreds of members of the community show up, and he had a PowerPoint that reminded me a lot of Mia's. Urban sprawl, horrible, insane urban infrastructure that makes no sense. The world coming to an end, overpopulation. And I had to say, Jeff, look, you're a wonderful guy and I love you. We don't have any of that stuff up here. We don't have urban sprawl. There's nobody up here. 99% of Monterey County's land is publicly owned. It's owned by the Forest Service. The DWP from Los Angeles owns significant parts of Inyo County. And it was a really thrilling process to work with these guys to adapt all the expertise and insights that they bring to a completely new kind of a setting and context. So it's been very exciting. So I thank you for your time and attention. Okay. How much and in what ways could the faculty and students at regional universities such as CSUMB help with such community revitalization efforts, perhaps at much lower cost, and with engaging the millennials to a much greater extent than otherwise possible? Okay, interns. Who wants to be an intern? Nobody? Whoever wrote this question, come up to me afterwards and we can talk about how to do this. There are real challenges. It's a remote area. I mean, it took me 8 hours to get here last night. There's some of these kinds of things I dealt with, but that's a key part of the Forest Service mandates, the public land mandates, and our community's mandate is to find a way to connect the resources and the landscape that we've got with everybody who would want to come up. So whoever wrote this question, please, let's talk afterwards. If drying climate reduces water volume in Mammoth Lakes, will this affect summer cyclist hiking, commerce, and interest? Tip, maybe BLM, can you help? We love dry land. It's an excellent question, and I want to say that the BLM is a very interesting and wonderful agency. I spent some time in Moab over the summer, and the trails work that's going on in Moab, I don't know if that's on the radar of folks like in Alta, but You can go into Moab, which is a very kind of I don't want to say it's unsightly, but it's a southern Utah kind of weird, ugly little desert town. But you can have the best outdoor recreation experiences you'll get anywhere. And all of it is due, I think, in large part to the kind of cooperative working relationship that BLM, that a public agency, has established with that community. You can rock climb out of a car. Someone can belay you out of the car at the side of the road. And stacked loop trail systems on the roads going north outside of town. There's just one after the other after the other. And I personally really appreciate that, because trying to build trails in California on federal land, you're dealing with NEPA, you're dealing with CEQA. It's probably the most difficult environment in the country to try to build these kinds of things. And the BLM is always kind of a leader in figuring out ways to integrate these kinds of use of land. So I really appreciate the work that they do. And what role, if any, did the Mammoth Lakes Planning Commission have in this process? And was it helpful or detrimental? It's a very interesting question. I'm assuming that's from someone who knows what planning commissions are in California. This effort, starting with the gate, it was a difficult process. I mean, it was a citizens advocacy, fight the power kind of thing. We went out and got 700 petitions signed to go to the town council to overturn the decision that they made. And we were advised that we had to sit down and meet with a real estate developer because somehow he held all the cards. And this is the day before we had to file the petitions with the county. And the real estate developer said, well, I don't do business with people that do this kind of stuff. Okay. And this is the real estate developer, the town manager, several politicians. Now, if you just take those signatures you got, if you don't file them tomorrow like you're supposed to, maybe we can work something out. And this is one of those moments where you say, well, I spent 3 weeks over the holidays in epic blizzards gathering all these signatures. Every signature that we gathered came from someone who understood the value of what we were doing. And it's like, of course I'm going to file these signatures tomorrow. Of course I'm not going to make a deal with you at this point. So this is how this thing started. That's the roots of it. And the Planning Commission didn't really have much of a role to play. There were individuals who were supportive of it. They appreciated the need for it. But I think it didn't really fall under their purview, under their jurisdiction. So one more, two more? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. So if back to this drying climates reduces water volume, Mammoth Lakes will affect summer cyclists. So the key thing is adaptation. So the last 3 or 4 Christmases, there's been enough snow for the ski area to open and you can go skiing. But I have people calling me. The MLTPA phone number is also my apartment. I do all this out of my apartment. I have the washer, the dryer, my desk, a server. It's all about like this. And people will call, hey, I'm coming to Mammoth. Where can I go mountain biking? Where can I go for a hike? And it's no longer possible to say, well, what are you, crazy? It's December. There's 6 feet of snow on the ground. We don't have those situations anymore. We have to be able to take the tools we have through technology to be truly adaptive in terms of developing and offering 365-day recreation experiences. We have to get to the point where if it snows 3 feet in July, we're going skiing. If it's 70 degrees in February for 3 weeks, we're biking, we're hiking, we're out on trails. And I also serve on a local transportation commission up in Monterey County. And a question came up from one of the Monterey County supervisors about a gate that gets locked in November and it's locked all the way through April when the snow theoretically melts. And the supervisor was asking Caltrans, well, look, we don't have any snow on the ground. Do you think we could maybe do something about opening this gate? And Caltrans is like, engineers, it's locked, it will stay locked, and then we will unlock it. Well, that's nice, and we appreciate that. That's very important, but the climate is changing. And we need to get adaptive. We need to start to adapt. And I think the lessons you start seeing out of climate change, on the one hand, is what are we going to do about it? How can we stop having this effect on our environment? But simultaneously, human beings are very clever things, and they will start to adapt. And I think that the key charge to us in the trail system and with our community for our recreation opportunities is to be adapting over all these things that are happening. So if you want to come up and ride your bike, we can give you the information through our technology and our information portals. Trails are in good shape. They're open. We're skiing now. We're biking. We're doing whatever we're doing, but we are truly in the adaptation business to these new challenges of a new climate. So,
thank you very much, John.
Thank you. What's that?
Thank you.